Why the ArcheAge didn't work out? What is the game going right? First, we have to understand that the fun of many players is in the game content itself. The approach of this analysis with a possible solution, we will talk about PvP and PvE content that influence the interaction of players either with other players or with the in-game content itself, by talking about the power of the Gearscore. We'll now talk about the game progression and what makes a player have more possibilities in the game than others, using the term unbalanced. The game system based on PvP PvE makes the gold selling based on players who don't have time to play to end up using this illegal tool in the eyes of the developer. For the PvP player in ArcheAge, we have the mechanics of progressing in PvE in order to acquire infusions, which makes the progression slow since it also needs to use another called gold. Both game progressions mean that the ability of a player to acquire gold in greater numbers by illegal means makes there a difference in the PvP and PvE of these players. In the game, this difference is called Gearscore or GS. Taking into the account the gold and infusions, we can reach an in-game progression limiter called labor, placed in the game just to reduce inflation and the use of scripts and bots. The real problem with the game is not the gold selling or even in scripts or bots. The real problem lies in empowering the overpower that is given to those who have a lot of gold in the game. Many things in the game require gold, which ends up regenerating inflation in the game and Gearscore disparity, which are the points awarded to the items added individually in a set. To a level or balance this system of players OP gold in-game, we have to have the player's perspective in relation to what is balanced or not, and who unbalances the game. What's the problem with the gold then? In reality, gold wouldn't be the issue in this case. We would have to find a more sustainable way to match the Gearscore progression between players. For that, we would have to qualify which stage in game that makes this real difference. Because despite there are set differences, a person with 1k Gearscore difference can still beat someone in 1v1 depending on the class and potions used. Straight to the point, infusions limit per character. Limiting the infusions that the players can put on a set piece will limit its progression. Luna Gems, Luna Frost, and Temperance also can help. Based on the idea of gear cap, gear capacity, and limitation, we note that the most viable sets to start playing the game are Dungeons and the Higher, the latter being a meta game for starting servers. While Dungeons are used as secondary sets, the craft ones qualify for the players who manage to gather and the player in the gameplay enough labor, resource, and collected items. Of course, there are bosses drops items around the map that can be stronger than crafting. You didn't explain? Here's the explanation. When a player Gearscore numbers start to get too far away from the other, we know that this can be a problem. The fact that we have the majority of players in the first month of a fresh start game at a similar level is due to the fact that the Infusions collection and their use with the gold and labor. I'll make an equation. This is the equation that we have to balance to propose a more competitive game in a game based on gold and labor. There are other in-game coins that aid in Gearscore progression as well, such as Honor Point and Arena PvP coin. That's the equation. Infusions multiplied by the gold, multiplied labor, equals the Gearscore. Of course, this is a simple equation. Solution to the Gearscore difference between players would be to limit the number of XP points per infusion that each player can make. Examples: Gearscore of the player 1 4k uses X number of XP, player 2 uses 5 times that, player 3 uses X divided by 3 number of XP. Okay? Well, we know that the player 1 is playing the tryhard game and that he gets the maximum XP for limited daily infusions in the game, and his in-game faction has all the castles on the map. He does all the infusions missions, but he's frustrated for not having gold to use his infusions. Player 2 has the same number of infusions collected as player 1, but player 2 has no gold limit that he can use and can use more infusions per day. Simply player 3 simply plays casually and barely collects infusions, leaving a lot of labor but with little gold in the bag. So just ideas here to get an overview. Based on equation and player examples, the solution to this problem: balance the player's Gearscore and the average Gearscore. Does that mean I limit myself to the player tree and game out? Perhaps limit the number of infusions to a percentage of the game's top Gearscore, thereby limiting your gear evolution. Does that mean it doesn't make up for being top 1 on the server? Maybe not creating participatory mechanics for the tops of the server, such as every top 1 of the server can manage something from their faction or their guild that gives advantage to the faction or entire guild, such as buffs for PvP or buffs for siege. Balanced, either in set or PvP mechanics, the classes. The problem with balancing a set is that you have to do it in relation to something. If I was to balance my set in relation to players who do infusion quest or do some dungeoning in the game, I would have to take into account that the first dungeons in the game are quite limited, for example those from the 55 and below. After level 55 we could start talking about limiting the Gearscore based on who attends dungeons and who reaches some stage of it. Even earn an item that makes the player advocate regarding their own Gearscore on the server. Having him 4.2k Gearscore per example, then it will cast it on the server with that item and it will go into an average Gearscore calculation, basically keeping the server in gear cap based on who frequents a dungeon, arena, or even a closed PvP arena. The simplest solution I found is to let whoever reaches a high Gearscore is forced to limit the number of infusions they use. If the player reaches 7k Gearscore, we will have to say to him, look, you were the first to reach this Gearscore, now wait until the average player can reach the same level. Maybe this is a bullshit a priori, because not necessarily the player use a legal gold form. An ideal way to consider who has a high Gearscore difference and achieves it quickly would be to place the player on a list of those who may or may not have infusions limits. So even if the player makes another account, the game is not harming other players by averaging Gearscore but limiting attitude of excessive player. For example, every 1000 players, if a percentage of those reach a very fast Gearscore and with a distance, we can include it in a special player system, and those limit the number of infusions in your character and pets. So limiting the attitudes of a specific players is the most suitable way to limit gold buying and a legal bot script market. By limiting the infusions of these players, we can contribute to the progression of players who are not experienced in the game and who, even so, can compete PvP among the strongest on the server. By causing the server to be forced to have a Gearscore difference for the larger average players and limiting progression of players who manage to reach high Gearscore very quickly. In practice, PvE objectives would be more contested because the number of players in the same set level would be balanced and competitive, which would make the fun greater for not having a guild or two of 100 players against 400 players for a goal. It will be more like 250 to 250 balanced, depending more on the mechanics in the game, like mount, means of locomotion, and shock collars of the raid. How to identify the players that progress the Gearscore with speed? To identify players who progress with a certain speed in ArcheAge, we must consider which Gearscore we are talking about, because in the beginning players reach numbers much faster than others, not using illegal advantages in the game. That even set higher, there will be no change in Infusions, considering from level 55, from then on, after his 3-7k Gearscore and level 55, we can validate whether a player excels rather quickly or not. Adding to the text, Luna Gems, Lunafrost, and Tempering can be a problem to Gearscore also. Leave your like if you like the video, keep your fun, and be good.